In November 1914, Admiral Maximilian von Spee delivered Britain's worst naval defeat in over a century, then died with his two sons 5 weeks later when the Royal Navy exacted devastating revenge. This is the story of a doomed squadron that sailed 12,000 miles across the Pacific, knowing it could never return home, fighting to the death against overwhelming odds. Von Spee's saga contains all the elements of Greek tragedy: a noble commander who foresaw his own destruction, sons who died alongside their father, and the terrible symmetry of two battles that bookend one of the most dramatic naval campaigns in history. Maximilian Johannes Maria Hubert Reichsgraf von Spee was born June 22, 1861 in Copenhagen, the youngest of 5 sons in a Catholic Prussian aristocratic family from the Rhineland. Tall, blue-eyed, with wavy hair, bushy eyebrows, and a beard, von Spee cut a commanding figure befitting his ancient title of Imperial Count. He joined the German Navy at 17, served in colonial campaigns in Africa, and saw his first combat during the Boxer Rebellion in China in 1900. By December 1912, when von Spee hoisted his flag aboard the armored cruiser SMS Scharnhorst at Tsingtao, he had risen to vice admiral and commanded what many considered the finest cruiser squadron in any navy. His flagship and her sister Gneisenau were crack gunnery ships. Between them, they had won the Kaiser's Prize for shooting 4 times. The crews had served together for years in East Asian waters, achieving exceptional proficiency through constant training. Unlike reservist manned ships in home waters, these men were professionals who knew their vessels and each other intimately. Von Spee was rigorous but caring. He relaxed shipboard formalities during the long Pacific voyage, integrated the wardroom messes, and maintained morale despite isolation. His officers described him as modest and chivalrous in victory, earning the unreserved support and loyalty of his men. When subordinates proposed aggressive action, he made decisions promptly. When a fellow officer proposed toasting the damnation of the British Navy after his greatest victory, von Spee walked out in disgust. 2 of his 3 children served under him: Lieutenant Otto von Spee, 24, aboard the light cruiser Nürnberg, and Lieutenant Heinrich von Spee, 21, aboard Gneisenau. Father and sons would die together on the same day. When war erupted in August 1914, von Spee's squadron lay at Ponape in the Caroline Islands, thousands of miles from any safe harbor. The strategic situation was hopeless. Japan declared war on August 23, adding its powerful fleet to the Hunters. The Australian battlecruiser HMAS Australia alone outgunned his entire force. Von Spee called it "my special apprehension." British cruisers patrolled from Hong Kong, French and Russian ships lurked in Asian waters, and Germany's cable connections had been severed. On August 13th, his 53rd birthday, von Spee summoned his captains aboard Scharnhorst and announced his decision before a map of the Pacific. They would not return to Tsingtao, certain capture. They would not sail for Australia. HMAS Australia waited. They would not enter the Indian Ocean. There were no coaling stations. They would head east 12,000 miles across the Pacific to South America, where German influence was strong, neutral Chile would sell them coal, and no enemy squadron barred their path. His ships had already stripped for battle. Wood paneling, tapestries, carpets, and sofas had been torn from wardrooms and sent ashore. Officers kept only writing desks and chairs. The whole beautiful world through which we had passed flashed before us as we packed away all these treasures, one officer wrote. They were cutting ties with everything familiar. Von Spee summarized his predicament with stark clarity. "I am quite homeless. I cannot reach Germany. We possess no other secure harbor. I must fight my way through the seas of the world, doing as much mischief as I can, until my ammunition is exhausted, or a foe far superior in power succeeds in catching me." Winston Churchill later observed, "He was a cut flower in a vase, fair to see, yet bound to die." The squadron's journey reads like an odyssey. From Pagan Island in the Marianas, where von Spee detached SMS Emden for her famous Indian Ocean raiding cruise, the armored cruisers and remaining light cruisers threaded through the Marshall Islands, receiving news of Japan's declaration of war at Majuro. They crossed the international date line. One officer celebrated his birthday twice, cut the British cable at Fanning Island, and approached German Samoa hoping to surprise Allied ships, only to find the colony had fallen to New Zealand troops 3 days earlier. At Bora Bora, German officers speaking English convinced French authorities they were British. The French helpfully described Tahiti's defenses and sold them coal, pigs, and cattle. Only as the cruisers departed did they raise the German naval ensign, revealing the deception. The bombardment of Papeete on September 22nd announced von Spee's presence to the world. His cruisers silenced French shore batteries and sank the gunboat Zélé, but the French had been warned and burned their coal supplies, a huge black cloud spreading over the harbor. Von Spee departed empty-handed, his position now known to the Admiralty. By October 12th, the squadron reached Easter Island, where von Spee's reunited force, now including Leipzig and Dresden, coaled among the mysterious stone statues. A British sheep rancher cheerfully supplied meat and vegetables, accepting payment by check on a German bank in Valparaiso, which, remarkably, was later honored. Von Spee and his son Otto went ashore to view the giant carved figures, unknowing that they had less than 2 months to live. The final leg brought them past the towering cliffs of Masa Fuera, and on October 30th, within sight of the snow-capped Andes. 12,000 miles completed without engine trouble, morale intact, ready for battle. Rear Admiral Sir Christopher Cradock knew he was sailing to his death. The 52-year-old Yorkshire aristocrat was beloved in the Royal Navy for his gallantry and personal courage. He had stormed the Taku forts during the Boxer Rebellion alongside German and Japanese sailors. But the force the Admiralty gave him to hunt von Spee was dangerously weak. The ancient armored cruisers, Good Hope and Monmouth, both manned largely by reservists with no gunnery practice since commissioning, plus the modern light cruiser Glasgow and the utterly inadequate armed merchant cruiser Otranto. The pre-dreadnought battleship Canopus, with her 4 12-inch guns that could have deterred von Spee, was left 250 miles behind, too slow at 12 knots to keep pace with Cradock's cruisers. Before departing Port Stanley on October 23rd, Cradock gave his medals and decorations to the governor for safekeeping and told him plainly, "You will not see me again." The fleets met off the Chilean coast near Coronel on November 1st, 1914, at 4:40 p.m. when Glasgow spotted smoke to the northeast. Cradock formed his line and steamed north to intercept what he believed was only the light cruiser Leipzig. Instead, he found von Spee's entire squadron. Von Spee displayed tactical brilliance. He waited for sunset, knowing that once the sun dropped below the horizon, British ships would be silhouetted against the afterglow while his own vessels merged with the darkening coastline behind them. Heavy seas battered both squadrons, but the German ships rode the waves better. Critically, the lower gun casemates on Good Hope and Monmouth were flooded and unusable, eliminating half their firepower. At 7:04 p.m., with the light finally favoring him, von Spee ordered his ships to open fire at 12,300 yards. What followed was slaughter. Scharnhorst's third salvo ignited Good Hope's forward 9.2-inch gun turret, the British flagship's most powerful weapon destroyed before it could fire a single shot. Within minutes, Good Hope was ablaze. Gneisenau pounded Monmouth, whose 14 6-inch guns were hopelessly outranged by German 8.2-inch rifles. Cradock, his ship burning and listing, ordered Good Hope to charge directly at the German line, perhaps hoping for a torpedo shot, perhaps simply refusing to flee. At 7:50 p.m., a massive explosion ripped through Good Hope, her forward magazine detonating in a sheet of flame 200 feet high. The bow was severed from the rest of the ship. She drifted into darkness and was never seen again. Admiral Cradock and all 919 men died with her. Monmouth, listing heavily and on fire, struggled north through the darkness. SMS Nürnberg found her at 9:20 p.m. and illuminated the British ensign with her searchlight, giving the stricken cruiser a chance to surrender. Monmouth refused to strike her colors. Nürnberg opened fire at 600 yards. The British cruiser, unable to respond, slowly capsized. Captain von Schönberg of Nürnberg watched transfixed. The brave fellows went under with flags flying, an indescribable and unforgettable moment as the mast with the great top flags sank slowly into the water. Not a single man from either British cruiser survived. The seas were too rough, the water too cold, the darkness too complete for rescue. Total British dead, approximately 1,654 officers and men. German casualties, 3 wounded. Von Spee entered Valparaiso on November 3rd to a hero's welcome. The German community celebrated wildly, but the admiral would have none of it. At a dinner where someone proposed toasting the damnation of the British Navy, von Spee raised his glass instead to the memory of a gallant and honorable foe, threw the glass to the floor, and left. When presented with a bouquet of flowers celebrating his victory, von Spee refused them with words that would become his epitaph. "These will do nicely for my grave." He knew the truth that the cheering crowds did not. His ships had expended approximately half their irreplaceable 8.2-inch ammunition at Coronel, 422 shells from Scharnhorst alone, leaving only 350. He was still 10,000 miles from Germany with the world's greatest navy hunting him. The victory at Coronel had only hastened his doom. The news of Coronel reached London on November 4th and detonated like a bomb, Britain's first naval defeat in over a century. The shock was felt in every naval theater around the globe. Questions were asked in Parliament. Public confidence in the invincible Royal Navy shattered. But a new man now sat in the Admiralty. 73-year-old Admiral John Jackie Fisher, recalled from retirement just days before Coronel to serve as First Sea Lord. Fisher had designed Britain's revolutionary battlecruisers, fast, heavily armed ships meant specifically to hunt down and destroy enemy cruisers. Within 6 hours of receiving news of the disaster, he made a decision of remarkable audacity. He would detach 2 of those precious battlecruisers from the Grand Fleet and send them to the South Atlantic. HMS Invincible and HMS Inflexible were fearsome weapons. Each displaced 17,250 tons and carried 8 12-inch guns, weapons that vastly outranged von Spee's 8.2-inch rifles. At 25 to 26 knots, they were faster than any ship in the German squadron. Fisher's own creations would hunt down his enemy. Vice Admiral Doveton Sturdy, whom Fisher personally despised, received command. Churchill wanted him off the Admiralty staff, and Fisher saw an opportunity to send him into danger. The battlecruisers departed Devonport on November 11th, repairs still incomplete, dockyard workers still aboard. They were accompanied by armored cruisers Carnarvon, Cornwall, and Kent, plus the Coronel survivor Glasgow, whose captain burned for revenge. The operation was secret. When British ships reached Cape Verde on November 17th, officers heard locals discussing their arrival, but the word never reached von Spee. The German admiral delayed 3 crucial days at Picton Island in early December, capturing a British collier and unloading her coal. Had he not dawdled, he would have reached the Falklands on December 4th, 3 days before Sturdy arrived. That 3-day delay would cost him everything. On the morning of December 7, 1914, Sturdy's squadron steamed into Port Stanley Harbor. The British were coaling, conducting repairs. Invincible had divers working on a cable wrapped around her propeller. Cornwall had her boiler fires extinguished. Bristol had an engine dismantled. The old battleship Canopus sat grounded in the harbor entrance as a floating gun battery. At 7:30 a.m. on December 8th, German lookouts aboard Gneisenau and Nürnberg, sent ahead to scout the harbor, spotted smoke rising from Port Stanley. They approached to investigate what they expected to be a lightly defended coaling station with perhaps an old cruiser or 2. The moment of recognition came around 9 a.m. Executive Officer Hans Pochhammer aboard Gneisenau spotted the distinctive tripod masts of British battlecruisers rising above the harbor. "This was a very bitter pill for us to swallow," he later wrote. "We choked a little, for it meant a life-and-death struggle, or rather a fight ending in honorable death." Canopus opened fire at 9:19 a.m., her 12-inch guns splashing shells near the German scouts. They fled immediately. Von Spee, receiving the stunning news, turned his squadron away and ran southeast. Sturdy, informed of the German approach, displayed remarkable sang-froid. He ordered the crews to finish their breakfast. He knew his faster ships would catch von Spee in the calm, crystal-clear weather. There would be no escape. By 10 a.m., the British squadron was raising steam and putting to sea. The chase began. German ships making 21 knots watched the British closing at 26. Around 1 p.m., Inflexible opened fire from her forward turret at 16,000 yards on the German light cruisers, bringing up the rear. At 1:30 p.m., von Spee made his final decision. Escape was impossible. He signaled his light cruisers, Dresden, Leipzig, Nürnberg, to scatter and try to save themselves, while his armored cruisers turned to fight, buying time for his smaller ships. It was, like Craddock's charge at Coronel, the act of a man who knew he was going to die. The afternoon of December 8, 1914, brought hours of running battle across a calm, sunlit South Atlantic. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau fired with their customary accuracy. Invincible was hit early, and German shells continued to find their marks. But British 12-inch guns outranged German 8.2-inch weapons by thousands of yards. Sturdy could stand off and pound his enemies without suffering effective reply. Scharnhorst bore the brunt. Shell after shell crashed into von Spee's flagship, flattening her funnels, starting fires, knocking out guns. By 4 p.m., she was a floating inferno, listing heavily, most of her portside armament silent. At 4:04 p.m., von Spee turned northwest, a desperate attempt to bring his undamaged starboard guns to bear. It was not enough. At 4:17 p.m., SMS Scharnhorst capsized and sank. Admiral Maximilian von Spee, his entire staff, and approximately 840 officers and men went down with her. There were no survivors. The British ships focused on destroying Gneisenau made no attempt to rescue the flagship's crew. Von Spee's last signal to Gneisenau had been simple: try to save yourself. Gneisenau fought on alone for another 90 minutes, battered by Invincible, Inflexible, and Carnarvon. Her crew continued firing even as the ship burned around them. By 4:47 p.m., she had exhausted her ammunition, then freed a jammed hoist and fired one last shot. At 5:40 p.m., Captain Merker ordered the seacocks opened. At 6 p.m., Gneisenau heeled over and sank. British boats immediately lowered to rescue survivors. 190 men were pulled from the 4 degrees Celsius water. Many more died of exposure before help reached them. Among the dead was Lieutenant Heinrich von Spee. The light cruisers met similar fates. Leipzig, cornered by Glasgow and Cornwall, fought until her deck ran with blood, and flames prevented anyone from reaching the ensign to lower it. Captain Hahn, his ship sinking, shared his cigarettes calmly with survivors, ordered them into the water, then walked forward and disappeared. Only 18 of 294 men survived. Nürnberg, chased down by HMS Kent in an exhausting stern chase, suffered 2 boiler explosions but fought to the last. As she settled, Kent's searchlight illuminated a German sailor standing on the upraised stern, waving a German ensign lashed to a pole. She sank at 7:27 p.m. with only 7 survivors. Lieutenant Otto von Spee, the admiral's eldest son, died with his ship. Only Dresden escaped, her turbine engines giving her the edge in speed. She would be hunted for 3 more months before being scuttled at Robinson Crusoe Island on March 14, 1915. The Battle of the Falkland Islands killed approximately 2,200 German sailors. British casualties totaled 10 dead and 19 wounded, a ratio that reflected the crushing superiority of 12-inch guns over 8.2-inch weapons when the target cannot escape. Admiral von Spee and both his sons perished within hours of each other. A commemorative medal was struck in Germany showing the busts of all 3 with the inscription, "Near the Falkland Islands, in the deep ocean, lie German heroes, lie the 3 Counts Spee." In 1934, von Spee's daughter Huberta christened the pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee, which was itself scuttled off South America in December 1939, exactly 25 years after her namesake's death. The wreck of Scharnhorst was discovered in December 2019, lying at 5,282 feet depth, 98 nautical miles southeast of Stanley. Expedition leader Menzenbaum described the moment. Suddenly she just came out of the gloom with great guns poking in every direction. The Coronel Falklands campaign holds a unique place in naval history. It was among the last major engagements fought under the old conventions, ships fighting to the death with colors flying, admirals going down with their flagships, chivalry between enemies. Von Spee's refusal to celebrate his victory and his tribute to a gallant and honorable foe represented a world that would soon be swept away by industrialized slaughter on the Western Front. The battles also demonstrated the strategic realities of sea power. Von Spee's squadron, for all its excellence, was doomed from the moment war began. Cut off from resupply, hunted by a dozen navies, he could only postpone the inevitable. His Pacific voyage was a masterpiece of naval endurance, his victory at Coronel a tactical triumph of timing, gunnery, and position. But none of it changed the fundamental equation. Britain controlled the seas, and any German warship beyond the safety of the high seas fleet was living on borrowed time. December 8th remains a public holiday in the Falkland Islands. The monument in Stanley, the southernmost World War I memorial on Earth, commemorates both the British sailors who died at Coronel and the Germans who died at the Falklands. The enemies who killed each other lie remembered together far from home in the cold waters of the South Atlantic.